Mark Cassayre, who's going to come up from the permanent observer from the International Development Law Organization to the United Nations office in Geneva. Mark.
All right. So I actually years ago went to Hyde Park. I was an 18-year-old. It was a lot less sophisticated than this. I remember the soapboxes, people screaming and yelling. I probably should have put on an extraterrestrial outfit or something to get your attention. So maybe just to wake everybody up, I'm Mark Cassayre from the International Development Law Organization, and I am coming call one all, come read all about it. We got the news for you, the great news, addressing statelessness with a rule of law approach. Answer our question here. In the spirit of Hyde Park, we'll get loud and obnoxious. No, I won't do that, I promise. But what I want to do is maybe just tell you a little bit about this approach that we've been working on with UNHCR. And it's really exciting because we're trying to bring in this concept of using rule of law as a tool to address statelessness, but also to address development. And so we just launched this issue brief yesterday. I put copies over here on the table for those that want it. It's the issue brief that we have here. And it's really to try and generate a conversation about how to use the rule of law as a tool and how to make sure that's an effective tool for people who are in stateless situations, and also to make sure that's contributing to development. So first of all, maybe just a brief snapshot. The International Development Law Organization, we're an intergovernmental organization. We're headquartered in Rome. I'm based here. And we focus on rule of law as a tool for peace and sustainable development. And so for us, it became a natural to work with UNHCR, which has the lead on statelessness, to see how we combine forces and actually come up with something that will be effective for development partners as well to use as a tool. So first, let me just ask, why should you care? Why should you care if we can use statelessness as the rule of law? Well, first of all, 4.3 million people at least live in a state of statelessness. And they're incredibly vulnerable individuals. They could become easily victims of abuse, mistreatment. They don't have access to services. They don't have access to the system like everybody else. Lack of documentation is a huge problem. That's an individual issue for people themselves, but also, if you look at this economically, they don't have necessarily access to education. They can't participate in the economic life of a community, and it has a huge constraint on the growth of an economy, the ability of of governments to really be inclusive. UNHCR had a couple of studies. I'll just cite some statistics. In one country, poverty levels were 24% higher among stateless communities than the general population. In another study, 39% of the stateless were uneducated compared to 15% of those in the general population. These are significant numbers when you're talking about 4.3 million people around the world, or most likely even more. That leads to enormous social tension. There's conflict risks that we need to be cognizant of and attentive to. So if states want to address the issue of their development problem, they need to also address the question of statelessness. And so that's where this approach comes in. I apologize. I'm probably gonna mess up the slides. So that was the actual cover of our report there. I want to maybe just quickly tell about why we look at the rule of law in this context. First of all, we as an organization have found that it's an incredibly effective tool to be able to address development needs. So by having an inclusive governance system, having good governance, it really does improve the development outcomes. And when you can see individuals, they truly thrive in context of rule of law. Where rule of law is present, I think we just heard it, good governance is one of the key factors you just heard in the most recent presentation. So it's an incredibly important factor in addressing development and other social problems. So quickly, rule of law, when we talk about rule of law, there's a long UN definition. I'll spare you the long version of it, but it really comes down to all states, individuals, all actors being accountable to laws that are equally enforced, consistent, and in line with international human rights standards and norms and standards. What that really means is, do the institutions of governance function, or do people have access to those institutions? And when the institutions fail, how do people have redress? How do they actually make sure that those problems that they see can be resolved? That's really what we're talking about with the rule of law. So it really is a question of putting people at the center of justice solutions, so that they have a stake in what's happening and they can be part of the solution. So that leads us to the question then of how we actually look at addressing, using a rule of law approach to address statelessness. First of all, we have these 4 different key elements that we've highlighted from the rule of law toolkit that we have to try and address the question of statelessness. First, it's equality under the law and non-discrimination. So there has to be, as we said in this UN definition, everybody has to be treated equally and fairly. And in the case of statelessness, this has typically been a problem because oftentimes you have, there were cases of mothers that were not able to transmit citizenship. So a great example that we'll see in the report is Morocco that changed its laws to be able to allow mothers to transmit citizenship to their children. And this move alone, by putting them equally under the law, it's had the effect of allowing them to document about almost upwards of 35,000 kids a year. And so you're solving a huge problem by having this equality under the law. The second element is compliance with international human rights norms and standards. So not only do governments have obligations under the various conventions that they've signed, but there's also the norms and standards that go along with it in human rights and whatnot. And like I said, I'll let you read the report for yourself, but in the short version, a good example of this is the Philippines. They applied the Foundlings Act, which would guarantee citizenship for any children that were born that were not identified as their parents. So, for example, if they were found or delivered to an embassy, even a Philippines embassy, they could then have citizenship of the Philippines. So that's helped resolve an issue that was a previous lack of compliance with international obligations. The third component is the legal empowerment and access to justice. And my time is up, so I have to just say that what that really means is that people can have access to justice solutions. The fourth is the inclusive and participatory governance, and won't give you an example because I am out of time. But I do want to say before I conclude that essentially
this is to let you know that the special session on the World Development Report is starting in room AEBEC. If you could kindly make your way, thank you.
So I guess that means I stop talking with a final conclusion here, that what it means is that we have this approach that we've put down on paper is really to help governments, other development actors, organizations, to be able to use a rule of law approach to think about this and how they can include this approach in their development programs to both help stateless people and resolve the statelessness issue and achieve these development outcomes through this approach. And what that really means then is that we've found a durable solution for people in statelessness, and we've found a way for states as well to achieve their development goals. Thank you.